Hey, good morning, Discovery. Welcome to week 35 of Church at Home. I'm just kidding. I don't know how many weeks it is. It's been a lot, and I know that. And I also know that Vanessa and I, we miss everyone so much. We can't wait to see everyone whenever that time comes that we can start meeting again together. But we pray that you guys are doing good. Hey, before we jump into this morning, I do want to say that I want to encourage you, if you feel so led, why don't you right now, just before I continue on, go ahead and share this feed. Right now, I'm going to pause and you can go ahead and hit share real quick, and then we'll jump right back. Okay, so ready, set, go. Now, go ahead. I'm just waiting. Don't mind me at all. Okay, did you do it? Well, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that you shared it, so thank you so much. Today, I thought it would be just a good idea to continue on in the theme of the mind. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and do that. But before we start talking about the mind, how many of you guys have ever done the 5 love languages? You guys remember that? I don't remember what all of them are. Like I shared with you guys before, my love language is physical touch. And so I love that. My wife is probably not the biggest fan, but bless her heart, she tries. And so what I love doing is I love to cuddle with my wife. Don't worry, we're keeping it at that. We're keeping it PG this morning. But I love cuddling with my wife, and for the most part, she's very receptive, and because again, I think she just knows my love language. But recently, this is so insane. Recently, every time that I go to cuddle with Vanessa, to hug Vanessa, we hear little pop, 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 little footsteps running towards us, and it never fails. All of a sudden, my son, my youngest, Sammy, who just turned 2, he comes and he jumps on his mom and he starts pushing me away. I know. He does this thing now where he goes like that. He puts his hand out like that, and so it never fails. My wife and I we're hugging. What is a huggle? We're hugging, and it never fails. My son comes and he comes running into into where we're at. He could be doing something completely different. He comes and he just starts pushing me away. There's moments where I try to, no, Sammy, you're not gonna, this is my wife, I'm a hugger, and he'll start pulling my hair, and then I'm like, no, heck no. I start pulling his hair. I'm just kidding. But he's literally trying to get me off, and there's this battle going on for my wife. And it's funny because this battle continues. It keeps going back and forth until Vanessa steps in and she says, Sammy, your mommy and daddy need time for each other. And I was actually thinking about that. I was thinking about how my son and I, we have this battle, and we're battling it out, trying to get in position to love and to show affection towards my wife, his mom, and how we get nowhere until Vanessa makes a conscious decision and lets Sammy know. See, I think this is very fitting and very similar to what takes place in our mind. See, last week we talked about this idea that your mind is a battlefield. It's a battlefield, and there's two sides going at it, back and forth. Last week we identified these two sides as the first side are Satan's lies, and then the other side is God's truths, and these two sides, they're battling it out for the position of our mind, for territory of our mind. And it's going back and forth, back and forth. And just like how my wife, it wasn't until my wife stepped in that this battle stopped. I think the same is true when it comes to the battle that's going on in our mind. Now, let me just stop and pause and say this. I 100% believe that if God wanted to, he could instantly, in a snap, just demolish, destroy Satan and apply in the things that he's trying to do to our mind. In fact, we actually know that God defeated Satan by what he did on the cross. And so I do want to get that out there. But I do want to say that I think that there is something to when you and I, when we jump in and we make this conscious decision to say, hey, this is not taking place. You and I, we have a responsibility of what we allow in our mind. In fact, we read in a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote in Colossians that he identifies like these two sides that are going to battle, and he encourages us on how we should address these two sides and what our approach and perspective or posture should be. So let's check it out. Colossians chapter 3. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Okay, so in this verse, Paul identifies two different mindsets. The first mindset is the mind that is set on things above. And so I want to term this as the mind of Christ, the mind of Christ. And so when my thoughts are filtered through the mind of Christ, I begin to see my situation, my hardships, my life through the lens of who God is and his abilities and his strength. And so that's the mind of Christ. When I filter my thoughts through the mind of Christ, I'm seeing things through Christ's ability. And then the second mindset that Paul identifies is the mind that sets its sight on earthly things. And so I want to term this the mind of me. The mind of me. So quite opposite than the mind of Christ. When I'm filtering my thoughts through the mind of me, I'm filtering my situations, my experience, my life through my abilities, my capabilities, through my strength. And so for a lot of us, we get in trouble because we begin to filter our minds not through the mind of Christ, but through the mind of me. And we all of a sudden become overwhelmed and we become stressed out and we become fearful because our thoughts are not being processed through God's abilities, but through my abilities. And so Paul, he identifies these two different mindsets. And then he's like, hey, but you got to choose. Like you have to make a decision on what mindset or where you're going to position yourself under, how you're going to position your mind. Because whoever I allow to rule my thoughts, in essence, becomes my God or my boss or my ruler. And here's why: because the direction of your life is determined by your greatest thought. See, think about it. Your outward expression of depression first started in here. And so we have to get to this place where we decide and we choose how we're going to, or who we're going to position our mind under. Is it going to be under the mind of Christ, or is it going to be under the mind of me? And so this morning, the question, I suppose, is like, how do we do that? How do we move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ? And I'm so glad that you are asking that question right now. Now, something that you may or may not have known, that this ability to for people to go from the mind of Christ to the mind of me, or in essence, if I can say it this way, the mind of Christ being uppercase G God, and the mind of me being lowercase g God. This concept of jumping from God to God is seen all throughout Scripture, right? And so we're going to look at a passage in Joshua that where he has to deal with a bunch of people who one day are in love with God, the God of the Bible, the God that we read about in Scripture, the God of heaven and earth, that created heaven and earth, the God that came down in human form to die on the cross for someone as wretched as me. Like that God, they would love this God one day, and then they would jump to loving their little gods, their idols, their selves, the minds of me. And so Joshua, he has to address this group of people who are jumping back and forth. And so what he does is he gathers everyone up, and for like a town hall meeting, okay? And then he gathers everyone up, and what he does is he starts off with giving them like the history of Israel. And he goes back and he's like, hey, remember how God was faithful when he brought you out of Egypt? And they're like, yeah, we remember. And then he's like, do you remember when we were lost in the wilderness for 40 years and how God provided manna from heaven and water from a rock? And the people are like, yeah, we remember. And then he says, like, do you remember when our enemies tried to capture us and when we had to go to battle? Do you remember how God fought on our behalf? And they're like, yeah, we remember. And then he gets to this place in Joshua chapter 24 where he begins to challenge him, actually, to decide what God they were going to serve. And so this morning, as we read through this text, and as we learn and observe Joshua and the steps that he's moving people from going from the mind of me to the mind of Christ, what I would challenge you to do is for you to begin to decide this day who you're going to serve, who you are going to allow to dictate, to rule your thoughts. Are you going to filter it through the mind of Christ or the mind of me? See, because the goal is that we're not jumping back and forth. We're not jumping from the mind of Christ. Oh, it's not convenient. The mind of me. Oh, I need God. The mind of Christ. Right? Like the goal is that we would just consistently make a decision. And so let's read it. Joshua chapter 24. Check it out. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And so what we're going to do is look at the next few verses and to help identify the three steps that Joshua gives to move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ. And so we're going to start in Joshua chapter 24, and verse 15. Let's read it. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The first step to move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ is to make a conscious decision. Man, I love that verse. Like Joshua, he's getting in the face of the people and he's like, hey, like I know that there's been generations of your forefathers and your mothers who have worshipped a God, and that there's this generational thing that can happen. And he's like, but guess what? You don't have to follow it. In fact, he says, what I want you to do this day, choose who you are going to serve. Here's what I find so interesting, is that in the steps of Joshua moving from the mind of me to the mind of Christ, the first step that he is suggesting has nothing to do with physical or manual work. But he says, choose this day. The first thing that Joshua is having these people do in order to move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ is to make a conscious decision in here. Listen, your ability to move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ, your ability to be able to stay and position yourself under the filter of Christ's ability starts with you making a conscious decision and saying, I choose you. Today I choose you. Come on. It starts first off with us making this decision of choosing the mind of Christ. This idea of saying to your mind, I'm choosing to filter my thoughts through the mind of Christ. And so the first step is to make a conscious decision. Let's read the next verse to see what the next step is. Check it out. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you, and you yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. So the second step for me to move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ is to have intentional actions. Okay, so after Joshua tells him to make a conscious decision, now all of a sudden he's like, okay, now is the time to actually put into action, physical action, the decision that you made up here. Because he says, now it's time to throw away your gods. So it's not enough, right? Just to think it, but we actually have to put action to it. Like we have to identify and uproot everything that would try and to call us back, to bring us back to falling in love with the mind of me, with lowercase g, God. We got to identify those things and we got to uproot them. Right? So maybe for you, it's like a group of people that constantly just bring you down. And it's not your spouse, okay? Like we're not talking about that, but like groups of friends that are counterproductive to you having the mind of Christ. Like we have to identify that and uproot it. Maybe for you it's the news. The news is like causing all kinds of fear in your life, and this fear is causing you to sway from the mind of Christ to the mind of me. And now all of a sudden, like I'm fearful about everything. Like maybe it's time to identify and uproot that. Like I don't know what it is specifically for you, but I do understand what Joshua is saying and how he's encouraging us to uproot, to toss away, to throw away those things, those gods that are counter to us filtering our thoughts through the mind of Christ. Now let's look at the third and final step that Joshua is giving us in our attempt to move from the mind of me to the mind of Christ. Check it out. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. The third and final step to moving from the mind of me to the mind of Christ is to welcome accountability. So I want you to get what is happening in this moment. Joshua, he's bringing them to these stones, and he's saying, hey, these stones are a witness to what you have decided this moment. In other words, Joshua is showing the importance of accountability. See, whatever decision that you are going to make, whether it's following Jesus or whether it's learning to filter your thoughts through the mind of Christ, whatever important decision you are making, you can't be the only person to know that. You gotta have someone so that when you begin to drift and when I begin to drift, these people can grab us by the head and shake us and say, hey, don't you remember on May, whatever today is, May, I don't know, fill in the date here, 2020, you made a decision to no longer position yourself under the mind of me, but position yourself under the mind of Christ. And so Joshua is just letting us know how important it is that we have these people around us to keep us accountable, to remind us of the decisions that we're making. See, this morning, my heart for each of you and heart for myself is that we would learn to position ourselves under the mind of Christ, rather the mind of me. That today, that we would make a conscious decision and say that, God, I want to make you the supreme authority, the boss, the God of my life, but not just of my spirit, but the boss and the God of my mind.